Hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Luna Arcana's YouTube channel podcast, Letters from Luna. And today I'm talking to a very special person, Sangeeta Pillai, who I was connected. We'll talk in a minute about how we came to be connected just a couple of months ago. But just a quick intro to Sangeeta. Just a very exciting, prolific human being. Sangeeta Pillai is a feminist activist and writer. She's the creator of the multi-award-winning Masala Podcast, which I highly recommend you will tune into. And she's also the founder of the South Asian feminist network Soul Sutras. And I'll put links to all this in the little box under the screen. And Sangeeta grew up in a Mumbai slum fighting for her rights and found her feminism early on. And today she's recognized as a leading voice for South Asian feminism globally. Sangeeta's work challenges many cultural taboos from sex, sexuality, periods, shame, mental health, menopause, and much more, while celebrating many life-enhancing aspects of her South Asian culture, from the Kamasutra, Tantra, Ayurveda, Bollywood, and beyond. Sangeeta's Masala podcast has won 6 British Podcast Awards, 1 Audio Production Award, and the Spotify Sound Up 2018 Award. And most recently, Sangeeta and Masala Podcast have been on giant billboards in New York, London, Dublin, Cardiff, and Glasgow. Sangeeta has been featured extensively in the press from the BBC Radio, The Guardian, the Metro. Metro is a publication, newspaper in London, Cosmopolitan, the Evening Standard, Stylist, Eastern Eye, and the Huffington Post. And she's also the creator of Masala Monologues, a series of writing workshops and theatre shows in the UK and the US. Sangeeta is a regular speaker at the WOW Festival, the Shameless Festival, the Prima Donna Festival, as well as being a regular speaker on innumerable panels and podcasts. So prolific, yes. How does it feel to have your everything read out? While you sit there?
First of all, thank you for having me, Rohini. And it's an absolute delight to be here on a Friday evening in London and a Friday morning at your end. When you were reading my bio, and I feel this all the time, like I feels a little bit unreal. And I wonder if it's like, sometimes I think is that like a trauma response? What is it? But it almost feels like you're talking about somebody else, not me. And then I've got to remind myself, like, yeah, that is me. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's kind of how it felt.
Does. Yeah, I mean, I obviously don't have quite as many accolades and awards in my bio. But yeah, when people are talking about you in that way, it is that kind of very like, oh, like your consciousness kind of like goes outside, shifts over there, and it's like, oh, wow, that's me. And it feels like it's maybe like that child part that's coming up. That's like, oh, who's this person? And it's like, oh,
yeah. And also it's interesting, like the things that, like when you said giant billboard, I got really excited and I'm like, oh yeah, I was on a giant billboard. And that, like, it's so funny, of all the things you read, like that made me really excited. I'm like, oh yeah,
well, it is really exciting.
Yeah. So, it's, I guess that's the child part of me. That's the little girl who's like, oh my God, we read a billboard,
I love it. Yeah, I mean, it is exciting. It's like, whoa. Yeah. So it's like we met in a quite an interesting way recently. We won't talk about it for too long, but just a quick little, because I only met Sangeeta like at the beginning of this year, 2024, end of 2023. Yeah, I mean, you're the one, you like sent me this message and I looked up and I was like, who's this woman? Yes, I want to know her.
So the most random way. So I was on a flight coming back from New York to London, and I was supposed to go to kind of Palm Springs and, Joshua Tree. But I got a bit ill, and then I'm like, I took the flight, and I took an earlier flight and chatted to somebody who was next to me in the very long immigration line. And the guy said, I live in Joshua Tree. I'm like, oh my God, that's where I was supposed to go. And I couldn't go because I got sick. And we just started chatting. And he said, what do you do? And I told him what I do. And he's like, have you heard of Lunar Arcana? I'm like, what is that? And then he wrote it down for me on a piece of paper, like literally. I think your name was on it as well. And he's like, oh, she's a South Asian woman and she's doing this thing in Joshua Tree. I'm like, oh, wow, that sounds really cool. And I had this little scrap of paper, like who writes on a scrap of paper these days, right? But I had it and it was in my wallet. And I think I forgot about it when I came back. And then I took it out one day. I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember this. And I looked Luna Arcana up and I found Rohini and her website and kind of emailed and messaged. And that's how we met. Like, isn't that random and beautiful?
Yeah.
Like, I really think well, it's one of those things that was meant to be. I've even forgotten the guy's name. I can't remember now. But
David.
David, that's it,
Yeah.
David. Um,
If he's watching.
and so, David, thank you.
It's definitely one of those kind of kismet meetings. I was like, because when I got the message from Sangeeta and I looked you up, I was like, oh wow, her work is so resonant to me and very similar but different to what I do. And and just definitely someone who's like, yes, I want to be in her field and I want her to be in my field. And it's just like, okay, yes, I'm responding to this person and getting and making this connection happen. So Sangeeta, I mean, we're going to dive straight in because Sangeeta was born in India, in Mumbai, and grew up in Mumbai. And some of you may or may not know that I was born in India, in Kolkata. We had different, by the sounds of it, very different early upbringings and environments that we grew up in. But there's this very strong, like for Indian girls and South Asian girls, whether you grow up in a kind of well-to-do environment or in a slum environment, the frequency of shame around your body and around the sensations in your body and the things that happen to the female body is so strong and so palpable. And I love that your work really dives into that and without any fear, like fearlessly, shamelessly, and explores that because it's so heavy and so much taboo around talking about it.
Yeah, it feels like shame for South Asian girls starts very, very young. When we're little, one of the first words, whichever language you speak, but if you speak Hindi, chi, which is dirty, is the word that they use as soon as you say you've taken your clothes off and you're running around naked, as children should do. But that's the word, and Aye, which is Malayalam, which is kind of Kerala, where I come from. But those are the words that you hear at the earliest age. So you learn to associate being naked with shame. Anything that's not kind of within very uh, strict, prescribed, acceptable spaces is associated with shame. And I think that follows South Asian girls and women pretty much all their lives. So everything is associated with shame. Periods are shameful, sex is shameful, bodies are shameful, masturbation is shameful, everything, like anything that could give women pleasure is connected with shame, you know? Um, and so much of it permeates so many parts of our lives that as women in the culture, we rarely talk about these things because shame is the strongest way to silence somebody. If you put shame on it, you shut up, you don't speak about it. Your
Yeah.
body shuts up, right? Associates that rigidity with shame. So yeah, it sadly permeates every part of our lives. And even now in 2024, we're sitting here, we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
Most of us operate within shame, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, it's so that whole the chi chi, and yeah, I grew up in Kolkata, and it's like nongra, it's like dirty, it's like
Mm.
you should be ashamed of yourself. It's like one of the
Yes.
first things.
Yes.
And of course, the shame permeates all cultures that have been dominated by patriarchy, including Western culture.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like one of the ways that and I'm kind of on this mission to kind of let's collectively compost shame now, because it is so cut off from nature. It's so unnatural. In
Yes.
when we look at nature,
Yeah.
there's no shame. There's
Exactly.
shame is not there.
Yeah, it doesn't exist as a concept, does it?
Yeah, I mean, and in Western culture, it came through in the
Mm.
book of Genesis and Adam and Eve, and they felt shame, and we have, in South Asian culture, it's this. I think it's this domination of the feminine, female form and body, like you said, pleasure and agency over our own bodies, and there's such a and I'm not averse to contradictions, but it's just looking at Indian culture, South Asian culture, the pantheon of goddesses is
Yes.
so vast and so
Absolutely.
powerful. It's
Absolutely.
not, and they're not just consorts of the male deities.
No, no.
They exist within themselves, and you see them
Absolutely.
often portrayed in these very
Yeah.
sensuous ways
Yeah.
and these very free
Absolutely.
and wild and natural ways. Yet
Absolutely.
the, the woman, the female, the
Yeah.
feminine, or
Yeah.
is subdued, and we've all had experiences growing up of having our femininity and our femaleness assaulted often.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, can you talk a little bit about how you see that?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we could go
Um,
into this.
couple of things came up when you were speaking. So with goddesses, yeah, absolutely. I mean, think of Kali, right? Think of Kali who's bare-breasted, in her blue body with a demon's head in her hand, blood coming down, she's fierce, she's, in every way, she's very female, very powerful, and there ain't no shame, like it's not even close. And even within the kind of history of goddesses, when we think about, whether it's Kali, whether it's Saraswati, whether it's Amba, whatever, they they kind of went about their goddess life without shame. They had sex, they did whatever, they killed demons. It's very much, and like you rightly pointed out, they're not the consort of the god. They exist in themselves. And in fact, the most revered of any deity is Kali
Kali
in
and
India, like
Durga,
the Durga, like these are the
but
fierce
they're
forms of the
so
goddess,
connected.
the
There's no,
biggest festivals. Yeah.
yeah, and there's no like,
Um,
oh, we belong to
yeah,
this male deity here.
exactly, exactly. And the other thing I wanted to touch upon is something I was thinking about today and I was writing about it is shame didn't exist forever in our culture. I'm from Kerala. Even my great grandmother didn't wear a blouse to cover her breasts. They were bare breasted. It was very normal, very natural. When I used to go back to Kerala as a child, I'd see these old grannies like bare breasted, and it was perfectly natural and normal, and nobody said anything. So men were bare chested, and so were women historically in Kerala. Um, and a lot of things happened, but one of the key things was Victorian morality.
Yeah,
The British came and they're like, oh my God, what is this heathen behavior? We've got to change this, right? So if you go back far enough, um, I'm not saying the British brought shame. I think we did enough of that ourselves, but they were definitely a contributing factor. And shame wasn't always part of our culture, I think is what I'm saying, whether it's the deities, whether it's individual regions of India,
mm-hmm.
Kerala, coming back to Kerala. So the Nair community, which I'm part of, they were a matrilineal community.
Yeah, and they're indigenous. They're in very
Yeah,
indigenous
yeah.
birth-based. We'll talk about that in a
So
minute. Yeah.
in in that sort of social more, women controlled power. So the children had the mother's name.
Mm-hmm.
Property was passed on from the mother's family onwards. It didn't belong to the man. And men, they would come and go. A woman would take as many lovers as she wanted. And if she'd had enough, all she had to do was put his shoes outside or his umbrella outside. And that
Love.
was
Oh,
it.
I didn't know about that shoe and umbrella thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically just leave, Um, and so that's our culture also. So, there was no shame in how many ever lovers she had. Like that was her life.
Yeah. And that, you talking about that, it's like my body responds to that in such a visceral way because it feels natural.
Mm, exactly.
And indigenous cultures knew that. I mean, there are, of course, many indigenous cultures that were not uh, matrilineal and matriarchal, but there was this freedom around the body and the
Yeah.
expressions of the body.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and this kind of, yeah, there was no shame. There was no
Yeah.
like, oh, I have to cover up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at earth-based indigenous cultures, whether they are patriarchal or matriarchal or a fusion of both, um, the way that people dressed and related to themselves is just like not really separate from their environment, their natural environment. And then that kind of the colonized, because it's not
Yeah.
there was the indigenous European as well, so who also, but the corsetry, the whole
Mm.
concept of
Yes. Of
corsetry,
being held
bringing
in.
in,
Yes.
the body
Yes.
needs to be kind of
Yes.
held in,
Yes.
the wild and unruly,
Yes. Yes.
the body needs to
Yes.
be held in, and that kind of like,
Yeah.
and the female form
Yeah.
needs to look a certain way.
Yes.
And
Yes.
sexuality and women's
Yes.
sexuality definitely is
Yes.
not something that,
Yes.
behind
Absolutely.
closed doors. So yeah, so just these kind of natural sensations, compulsions, and expressions of the body, and especially the female body, is so, and like what you just described, just it's. I mean, it really doesn't exist apart from in very tribal places now, in
Exactly.
remote
Exactly.
tribal places
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
south of
Yeah. Yeah.
India,
Yeah.
and probably in some places and other
Yeah.
parts of India. But and that kind of puritanical, um, sex is bad, or female
Yeah.
sexuality is
Yeah.
bad,
Yeah.
um, is such a strange
Yeah.
domination of psyche and body. And I wonder
Yeah.
if, because for me, that I really see that puritanical streak as a kind of, as something coming from the European colonized
Yeah.
mindset, but I'd love to
Yeah.
hear your thoughts on it
Yeah.
from
I
like
mean, with
wisdom.
with Kerala, for sure, it was the British that came, and in fact, the law that allowed Nair women to own property and all the stuff that I described and have as many relationships as they wanted was only changed in the early 1930s.
Oh
So
wow.
it was going on up until that point.
Yeah.
And again, it was the British with that who came in and did not like what they saw. And I believe instigated the Nair men to kind of say, how can you allow this? And then there was like a whole big thing, furor, and then it was changed. So up until now, like even my grandmother, she was a really strong character. And my mother had my grandmother's name. So I always used to think as a child, like that's quite strange. Like all the kids had their
I
mother's
love
name, not
that.
their father's name. And it's only we were the first generation who got our father's names. So it definitely, in this instance, I know for a fact that was British. Like that was definitely the colonizer coming in. And there's a lot of articles that I've read where they've written back home to say, oh my God, what is this heathen behavior? And these women are doing all of this thing. And, it was very uncomfortable for them. So
Mhm.
think of where they've come from, like this very Victorian mindset where women can't even show their ankles. And there are these women kind of, I don't know, taking lovers left, right, and center and having children as they wish, you know. So it must have been really, really, I guess, triggering for them in a sense. So that was directly changed by the colonizer.
Mhm.
And again, I think it's the gaze of the colonizer that says things like, why aren't your breasts covered?
Mhm.
Where the kind of whatever the indigenous, the local people have never thought about that as a thing.
Mhm.
Like to them, it's so normal to kind of walk around. Why would you cover your breasts? And then suddenly it becomes a thing. So I think a lot of this is a colonizer thing. including the Kamasutra. I don't know if you might know this already, where when what is that, Arbuthnot and whatever, the two guys, they
Oh
discovered
yeah,
the
yeah,
Kamasutra
yeah. They found it.
in
Yeah.
they found it. And then
They
they
discovered
had
it.
it, yeah, they discovered it. And then they had it translated. And where the Kama Sutra was very much one of the sutras, like, there's Arthashastra, there's this, there's this. So the sutra, as you probably know, is a source of knowledge. So Kama is the god of love, and there's knowledge. And like Kama Sutra, there was like the science, the astronomy. It was one of the many things that were passed on as the sutras. So they existed, but these two British men brought it back to England, had it translated, and it was published as like a dirty piece of literature.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
became
look at the
pathologized
change.
into this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, look at the change. It's like, here's a text that we've created
It's a
to give you
sacred text.
knowledge. Yeah, it's a sacred text like so many others. So we're talking about in ancient India, we're talking about astronomy, we're talking about science, we're talking about mathematics, we're talking about sex. It's part of our lives. Like, it's one
And
of the
it's
things
all connected.
it's all
Oh,
connected.
yeah.
Exactly. It's all connected. There was not like, oh, you only do this. Like, a lot of the thinking at that time was very much to be an all-rounded human being. You needed to be good at a lot of things, including sex.
Yeah.
But
Which is
then,
a completely natural part
yeah,
of life.
exactly. And that's how we're all built, right? It's one part of who we are, the
Yeah.
beautiful, complex beings that we are. But anyway, they brought it back to England, and then they published it, and like it was like this rag that was shared, surreptitiously among people. And here's the really interesting thing. They added illustrations. So the original Kama Sutra doesn't actually have any pictures. It was a text. Like, that tells you everything. Let's just add some dirty pictures to make it even
Yeah.
more saucy, you know, and then kind of passed around as like this exotic Eastern, whatever,
Hmm.
uh, dirty book. So again, that shows you how a lot of morality was so different
Hmm.
from the colonizer's gaze compared to the indigenous person's gaze.
Yeah.
And the same thing can be a beautiful sacred text, and the same thing can be a dirty
Turned
book,
into yeah,
a
into this,
sordid kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah,
sordid. I thought, yeah, it's just this, exists in this kind of
yeah,
fringe place where like men look at it in secret away from their corseted
exactly,
wives over there. Um,
exactly.
and yeah, I mean, this is kind of making me think about something that I've been thinking about and talking a lot about with my husband as well. And just the whole, I mean, so the British were in India for like 200 and almost 250 years,
Yeah, yeah,
247 years or something like that.
yeah,
I can't remember exactly, but a long time. And that is enough of a swathe of time to change culture, to change the consciousness of a culture, and to change behavior and attitudes. And so, now when you kind of go, so I guess so this is, I'm kind of like looping back to this disconnect between the pantheon of amazing, sensuous, powerful goddesses in their own agency and the way that, I mean, it is changing now in India, but what we've experienced, like the way that women and girls are treated in India, their bodies, and the shame. And I wonder if, and for instance, when the British were in India, Ayurveda was completely outlawed. It wasn't
mm,
allowed to be practiced.
yeah,
And it was just pushed out into the fringes, only like people in villages and stuff.
mm,
Because before
mm,
that, Ayurveda, which is the
yeah,
science of wellness and wholeness, was practiced everywhere. And it's an ancient, ancient art and science. And so when the British came, Ayurveda was completely outlawed. Their own way of working with medicine and nature was outlawed, and it was only Western medicine that was allowed. So, in the same way, um, the whole way of relating to the female and the woman and the woman's body and the relationships between masculine and feminine, within that 200 and almost 250 years, changed to one where it's like the domination and suppression and shaming and all of these things. And so I feel that that's where this disconnect maybe has some roots.
To a degree, yes, I would say. I mean, some of the things we've already touched upon, where it was from the British gaze, Victorian gaze, where a lot of things in India didn't make sense to them. And instead of maybe trying to understand, because it's a very, very ancient, very complex culture.
Mm-hmm.
And things, whether it's the Kamasutra or Ayurveda, it takes a lot of studying to understand it. It's not a thing, it's like, oh, here you go, there's like a pamphlet. It's
Mm-hmm.
very deep, it's thousands of years old. And if you come from a place where repression is the norm, which Victorian England was, if you see something like this, I'm sure it's messed with their heads. I'm thinking of these young 22-year-old British recruits who've never been out of Surrey, like landing up in somewhere like a Kerala, it must really have messed them up. So I think a lot of things changed in those 250 years. For one, wealth. There was like
Yeah.
a
Oh my gosh. Yes.
really bad. Uh, I mean, I think somewhere I read a statistic that India was either the richest country in the world
Yeah.
or one of before
Yeah.
they
I
arrived.
mean, you can look it up on
Yeah, yeah,
Wikipedia. So their GDP
yeah,
pre-colonialism, pre-British
yeah,
rule was like they
yeah,
were
yeah,
wealthy,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that wealth was kind of distributed in a in a in a kind of fair way. I mean, for
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it is, yeah, debatable. There's the
yeah.
caste system, there's all of that, but yes, it was wealthy. That's the point.
Mm-hmm.
It was the richest country in the world, and when they left, it was one of the poorest countries
Yeah.
in the world. There were famines. The people didn't have food to eat, and a lot of the things that the British did were bringing that wealth back to England. So
Mm-hmm.
whether it was taking the cotton, taking the tea, finding a zillion ways to take that wealth and bring it back here. And even now, a lot of England is built on the
Oh yeah.
wealth of places like India. If you look back far enough, there's slavery and there's colonialism. That's where the wealth comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think what that does, I mean, not just economically, but if you think about an entire population that's gone from being really wealthy and really comfortable to not having food to eat, um, the power is, when you're really poor and you're hungry,
Mm-hmm.
um, you're going to think very differently to when you're comfortable and wealthy.
Yeah.
So, it's easy for us to sit here and talk about these things, but we were hungry. It's a lot harder. You
Yeah.
operate at a very different level.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the economics of it is one. And
Yeah.
then all these kind of moralities that they introduced, and they said suddenly the thing that was okay was banned. Suddenly that thing that you'd done for centuries was shameful.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of that kind of very insidious
Mm-hmm.
way of your way is heathen and our way is civilized.
Yeah.
I always think of the word civilized as a really interesting word. Who is civilized and who's uncivilized?
I
Like
know.
who
I think
gets to
there's a
decide?
quote by Mark Twain. He says, "Civilization is a great idea," or something
Yes,
like.
exactly, exactly. And their idea of civilization was Victorian morality, whereas
Which
the
is based
Indian
on
idea
shame.
of civilization, yeah, based on shame, based on covering up, based on hiding. Um, and there's what they said were uncivilized, and I'm sure I can quote a few of the British generals and people in power at that time who used that word,
Mm-hmm.
uncivilized,
Mm-hmm.
were just a country that was very so rich and so complex that they couldn't get their head around it. They couldn't understand it. So
Mm-hmm.
then easy to label it as uncivilized and heathen and whatever, and that we need to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they also kind of, I think there's a lot of complicated, I'm not going to put all the blame on the British because we had a whole bunch of stuff happen before that as well. There's a whole book called Manusmriti written, which really
Oh
changed
yeah,
a
I
lot of the
haven't read that. Yeah.
morality. So if you go back far enough, India was very, very liberal. Women had a lot of power. Courtesans were some of the most powerful people
Yeah.
in the kingdom. And then a few things happened and it did change. So the British weren't entirely to blame. They came in and they added
Mm-hmm.
things which, really complicated the system. But I think to me, the deeper damage is where they introduced a lot of systems that still exist in India, whether it's the education system, which is primarily English. So it, you know, even now an English education in India is more valued than a Hindi or a Bengali or a Malayalam education. You're seen as more,
Mm-hmm.
worthy if you've had an English education. If you speak English, you're considered superior.
Mm-hmm.
And where does that come from? Similarly, a lot of the kind of the legal system, the judiciary, all of it was
Yeah.
created by the British so that they could be administrators of it in a way that they understood.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to me, those are damaging. Like if there's a young student in a village who speaks their language, comes to a city, that person's not valued because he doesn't speak English. I mean, how strange, it's so messed up. So to
Yeah.
me, those are really, really damaging. And I don't know if India will ever recover from that. And again, not I am by no means saying it was this paradise of everything and then the British came and messed it up. There was a lot going on. There was a lot that went wrong. And even today, that's a whole other conversation. But they did add a lot of things that I think is still messing up South Asian culture.
Mm-hmm.
Shame being a big one of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and I think it is that kind of India was going through its own, and I heard of that book Manusmriti, and I haven't read it, but I will read it. Yeah, that it was going through its own kind of changes and evolutions
Mm,
and growing pains, which involve sometimes contractions. Um, and then this whole other energy
mm,
came in,
mm.
that is completely foreign and alien to what was going on, and to the British coming in, and what they were, they saw that this is like this wealthy,
Yeah,
abundant
yeah.
country, and it can be exploited, and really, for me, that the whole kind of use of shame as a weapon is
Mm,
such an interesting, and also kind of brings up lots of other emotions, but it started to be used as a weapon of control
yeah,
and
yeah,
domination, and
yeah,
which now still exists to this
yeah.
day, that I've experienced. And like, when I moved to England with my family when I was 10. So I already had this kind of, there was lots of like trauma, and my mother's trauma, and like, her, it just the passing on of the generational things, and then moving to England, where it was like, oh, I like that internalized shame that had already kind of taken root, and moving to England, and it was like, oh, I'm completely different, and I'm like that raw, just like the gaze on me as this kind of like,
Yeah,
just come off the boat, little in,
yeah,
and
yeah,
like was just like, oh, shame, and like I need to like look like these
yeah,
people around me, and like there's something, that whole yeah, it was this very strange melding of two different flavors
yeah,
and frequencies of shame that took a
yeah,
long time to
yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah,
dismantle and
yeah,
dissolve, but it just exists in such a weird and insidious way, and how it shows up in our bodies. Like, how has it shown up in your body? Like, for me, because it was inflammation and autoimmune.
yeah, 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 yeah. Um, in so many ways, actually. I mean, the physical is one. Like I've had lots of like what I think of as ailments that over the years have disappeared when I've started to do the work on myself and the work with the podcast and my network. Um, but also kind of being made to feel um, that you weren't good enough. So if you're an Indian woman growing up in India in the 80s, as I did, if you weren't married, that was a shameful thing. If you didn't have children, that was a shameful thing. And I chose in my very traditional family to absolutely go against everything they told me to do. I started working in advertising. I refused to kind of look at any of the boys they presented to me. I had my own friends. I wore whatever I wanted. So I was this very rebellious in their eyes. I wasn't really. I was being a very normal person, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and so there was a lot of shame there, uh, where it was directed to me and to my family to say, "Oh my God, your girl, what is she doing? What time does she come home? Why is she wearing this? Why isn't she married yet?" You know, like my mother would get asked these questions and she would obviously come home and tell me. So that's like lashings upon lashings upon lashings of shame.
Mm.
And the way I was very young and very naive in those days. So I would just bottle it all up because, you know, what are you going to do? I was very desperately trying to build a life where I could have my own money and have
Mhm.
have a job which allowed me that, because otherwise I'd just be married off to somebody, right? Um, so that was one part of shame, but also kind of living in Mumbai in that time as well. Um, you couldn't wear things that you wanted to wear. Um, I got groped almost every single day of my life, and since I was about 9
Yeah,
to
I mean,
till
I
I
tell people that, and they're like, "What?
it's so normal. Like
Eight,
if you don't
9 years
get graped,
old?"
like that's like, oh, what's like
I've
people will
learned from a
say
very
shit
young
to
age
you.
to walk like this with
Yeah,
my
to walk like this. I had
this,
these handbags. I'd have these big
like at
giant
8 years old,
handbags.
9 years old. I'm
Yeah,
like, "Huh,
yeah, yeah. And it's just like, oh, and if you said something, oh, men will be men, like that's just how it is. Uh, and so shame is so much part of your body every single day. To exist as a woman is shame. To breathe as a woman is shame. To talk is shame. To be is shame. To dress up is shame. Everything is shame. So you internalize a lot of this stuff and you kind of go through life and you're trying to survive, because survival in a lot of Indian cities is very, very hard. So you're getting up in the morning, going to whatever each person does, going to school or university or your job. All you're thinking of is like, I need to get to that place and do that thing. And you almost haven't got the luxury to think about these things. Like I feel like talking is a luxury and thinking and feeling is a luxury that a lot of people in places like the suburban Mumbai that I grew up in didn't have. You just got on with it. And it's only years later when you sit down and you process some of the stuff that's happened to you, that's when you realize, oh, that thing I felt, that hot
mhm,
feeling, that I felt, that sweat under my armpits, that was shame,
yeah,
right? I remember this horrible, like I've written about this train that I used to take to go to work. Like in Mumbai, the local trains are crazy, where you've got to literally, they're so crowded that before the train comes to a stop, you've got to jump in and you've got to leap and get into that train, because otherwise you can't get in and you can't go to work and you
mhm,
can't earn any money. Like it's that basic. And there's a compartment that's like a ladies' compartment,
yeah,
where the women go, because you can't let women into the general compartment. And there's two compartments, and one of them changes at a particular time. And I was working crazy hours in advertising, so I was really tired one day. I came back, got into a compartment, thinking it was the ladies' compartment. Somewhere during that 1 hour journey, it changed, and men got on. And oh my God, I was like, the stuff that happened that day, it was horrible. Like I don't even want to talk about it. It's just that
oh,
horrible.
I can,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, and I remember getting off and just standing there and crying on that platform. And it takes a lot to take someone like a Mumbai girl to stand there and cry, because every single day your body's assaulted. Every
yeah,
single
you
day
have
you're
to
kind of,
internalize a
it's
lot.
just, you internalize that stuff and like, yeah, yeah, fine, whatever. Um, and I still remember that shame to this day,
Mm,
that stink of shame,
mm,
and the way we're brought up, it's somehow always our fault.
yeah,
It was, what were you wearing? What were you doing? Why didn't you even, I don't even think I told anyone.
yeah.
Like I
Well,
knew
that's
what
the
the
thing
answers
because
would
there's no
be.
point.
There's no point. They'd be like, why were you in that compartment? Didn't you know no better? I'm like,
Yeah.
but, and I wasn't wise enough or smart enough to say, but why is the world like that? How does the world think it can like do that to a girl, who's going to work like every single day,
Mhm,
like a normal day-to-day thing?
mhm.
But yeah, there was a lot of shame. There was a
Yeah.
lot of shame in my life. There was a lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can so empathize and yeah, and feel that because I mean, obviously I left India when I was young, but even by the age of 10, I'd
Yeah.
already
Oh gosh, yeah, you would know.
experienced quite a lot of things where, and
Yeah.
even then I knew I just keep be quiet about it.
Yeah, just be quiet. And that's the programming. Be quiet. Go to the next thing.
Because even
Do
if I go
whatever
as
you're
a
supposed to do.
completely
Don't make a
innocent
fuss.
8-year-old and say to my parents, like, this happened, like that man did this
Yeah,
to me,
yeah,
they
yeah,
would be
yeah,
like, don't be silly. No, they
yeah,
didn't. No, oh,
yeah,
what were you doing? It's like I'm eight
yeah.
years
What were you doing? Yeah.
old.
What were you
And it
doing?
was
That's
only
always the
many years
question.
later that I told
Yeah,
my parents about, one very specific incident,
yeah.
and they were like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "Yes, my body. It's like, you
In
know,
your
this
body.
burning
Yeah.
brand, like you said. It's like, and yeah, it's such a. I mean, and so, how have your, you know, friends, connections, family in India been reacting and responding to your work and the things you talk about and the taboos that you're
Yeah.
approaching and speaking
Yeah.
to?
I laugh because they respond by not responding. They
Yeah,
pretend I don't do
yeah,
what I do.
yeah,
So if I post a picture of me drinking a coffee on a social media post, like a post social media thing, they'll be like, "Oh my God, that coffee looks amazing." If I talk about, I don't know, I was in a billboard or I was talking about sex or whatever on a panel, nobody says a word. So they pretend I don't do the thing that I do.
yeah.
That's how
Just
they
don't look at
respond.
that bit. Don't look at the actual
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, 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 yeah. The thing that she's actually spending her life doing, the
Yeah,
thing that's changing the lives of thousands and thousands of other women. Let's just
yeah,
pretend it's happening.
yeah. Yeah, and that leads me to just like, the response that you're getting from South Asian women who, like, I mean, like we've been talking, like, yes, I can relate. I can relate. Thousands and thousands of South Asian women who can relate to what what you're talking about and the things that you're bringing out into the light, because all that, shame only thrives in the shadows.
Darkness, yes.
So you're just like, here, let's talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
And I know you've been getting so much just so much from people who are like, oh my God, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh my God, like that is the most beautiful part of what I do. I can't even tell you, like it lifts me up. It, inspires me in ways that I can't even put into words. Like almost every single day or every other day, I'll get a message from somebody, either a DM on my Instagram or they'll find my email or they'll find a way to write to me. And I get these long emails from women. I had one yesterday from somebody. So the latest episode of Masala Podcast, there's one bit where I talk about body shaming, like how we're supposed to fit into the skinny Western aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And she wrote to me to say, this is how I grew up. And these are the things I was told. These long, email. And this is what my sister internalized. And then she attacked me because of this. So, and, sharing how then she moved to England and then she's done all this work and basically saying, thank you for saying the things you say. Because of what you say, I can then reflect on what happened to me and I
Mm-hmm.
can start to make sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was yesterday. But I get so many messages from like India and the States and the UK, and they all say similar things, which is, you make me feel less alone. Most of them say that. You help me make sense of things that didn't make sense before listening to your podcast or listening to you talk. Um, and you also make me feel like what I'm feeling is normal. Like that's the other thing. Shame adds that layer of like, okay, it's your problem. The thing that happened isn't the problem, but it's your problem. Um, so I get a lot of them. Probably the most dramatic, or one of the most dramatic reactions was I was traveling in Kerala last winter, around this time actually, February last year. And somebody messaged me on Instagram to say, hey, are you in Kochi, which is the city that I was in? And I said, yes. And she's like, well, I'm a huge fan of the podcast. Like, can I meet you for a coffee? And we met in the kind of local cafe. And she sat there and she said, your podcast changed my life. Like, and I'm like, okay. And she said she'd been in a marriage which she'd been kind of, I think it was an arranged marriage. And the guy was gay. The parents got him married off to her, thinking that's going to fix him, which a lot of South Asian families, even to this day, do.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to have sex with her, and they weren't intimate in any way. So she went and told his parents, and they were like, "Well, that's your problem. You're not able to whatever do whatever to him." Which is absolute bullshit. Obviously, the parents told him something, and then he forced himself on her.
Oh no.
She got pregnant. She lost a child. It was like so traumatic, poor thing. And she was like, through the whole thing, I kept listening to your podcast again and again and again. And she said, and eventually I left. And she then moved from wherever, I think I forget where she lived, to Kochi. When she now worked in Kochi, she was like, you know, like a really cool job in a really cool hotel. So she said, like your podcast changed my life, like quite literally. And I was like, I just sat there, I didn't know what to say to her. It was just so big that I didn't know what to
Yeah.
say to her. Like
Yeah.
we stay in touch and we've kind of swapped numbers and she's doing really well. But like that was probably to me like the most dramatic response to
Yeah. I
my
mean, it
work.
just humbles you, doesn't it? It's just like,
It really does. Yeah.
you just, I mean, because
Really,
it's,
really
oh, this
does.
work
Yeah.
is coming through me and it's helping you in this way. And even if it's like you're the one person that it's touched in this way, it makes it all
Yeah.
worth it.
100%. 100%. And to me, it's the most fulfilling, lovely, beautiful part of what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I will always reply because to me, like that's the joyous bit. Like whether it's a DM, whether it's a long email, I'll
Mm-hmm.
write another long email in response. Like I just feel like I owe it to somebody who's taken that time and energy to write to me in that and shared a lot of times really painful parts of their life with me. So I owe it to them to sort of respond in kind. So I always, always, always respond, and it's a
Yeah.
joy. It's not really a chore.
No. Yeah, no, that is really powerful. And that's like, whoa, it's quite a story. Um, and so, so you're now based in London and you've been there
Hmm.
for a while. And sort of your body of work is really materialized in London in the UK.
Hmm.
And you've
Yeah.
had a lot of support and success. Do you find that that the kind of the response that you get from doing, I mean, obviously there's a huge South Asian community in the UK, so
Yeah.
that's kind of your audience as well as South Asian women all over the world. But just from kind of the kind of cultural response to you, is it coming from, oh yeah, you're speaking about these things that happen in India and South Asia, this kind of, you know this kind of going back to what we were talking about, this kind of othering of like,
Yes.
yeah, this is this
Yes.
misogynistic patriarchal culture that exists over there, and yes, you can talk
Yeah.
about it here,
Yeah.
but nobody's really like joining up the dots and
Yeah.
making any of the
Yeah.
connections. Like,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
that's a really kind
Gosh.
of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
convoluted
No. No.
question.
No. 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 I get exactly what you mean, and it's so funny. I'll come to something that happened just today after I answer what you're saying, which is really connected. Um. So yes. So my work talks to primarily the diaspora, so British South Asian, American South Asian, Canadian South Asian, and a portion of Indian. My audience is Indian as well, but primarily diaspora. Um, and in Britain particularly, and you'll know this having lived here, um, the idea of India is like 60 years out of date. Like if you talk to like South Asian people, they'll be like, oh, but they still live in a village and do well. Like India's really moved on. Like it's,
Yeah.
if you go to Mumbai, it's pretty much similar to London, in so many ways. Like it's really, really changed.
Or New York.
But
Yeah.
like New York or London or any of these big cities, and a lot of cities, like they're all shopping at Zara and eating at McDonald's and whatever,
Yeah.
that's kind of what's happening in India. Uh, but the idea that a lot of British South Asians have about India is old.
Mm-hmm.
And even now they believe like these things only happen back there,
Mm-hmm.
but not understanding that the stuff that the culture you've brought over 70 years ago, whatever, still carries on in your own families, in your own home, because you're passing it on.
Mm-hmm.
Trauma passes through the generations, as we know. And the belief systems you instill in women, it carries on. So it might, on the outside, say a British South Asian is like, okay, I'm like, I don't know, in the media and I'm really cool and doing whatever, whatever. But she might still think that being married is the biggest thing that she
Yeah.
will ever do,
Yeah.
right? So this is what I mean by conditioning, by kind of these values, these kind of patriarchal values that we've all imbibed within this culture,
Yeah.
eating our rotis and then imbibing that culture. It's like part of, it's the same thing, right? You can't have one without the other,
Yeah.
unless you do like a lot of deep work as
Work. Yeah.
we're doing, So, but they don't understand. So there is a little bit of like, oh, that stuff doesn't really happen. And in fact, actually, it does to a lot more degree here, like in the UK right now. There are a lot of British South Asian girls who aren't allowed to cook in their kitchens when they have their period. This still
Oh
happens,
yeah. Yeah.
and in many ways it gets even more layered because their understanding of the culture is like 3 generations old. So they're like, it's almost like running a programming script
Yeah.
from the 60s that your computer's still running to without you
Yeah.
really knowing why you're
Yeah.
doing these things or why you believe these things. And you don't really have access to the culture because you're not, connected
Mhm.
to maybe India in the same way. So you can't see how much that culture has changed.
Yeah.
So you carry on behaving in these ways that
Mhm.
you think is your culture, but actually doesn't even exist.
Mhm.
And the other part of that I wanted to say, which is what I was talking about today. So I did a post on my Instagram today, which I was really nervous about doing actually. I've been thinking about this for a while, but today I've kind of plucked up the courage to talk about racism in the South Asian community amongst each other.
Yes. I think
It's
there's a
quite
conversation
deep.
around that here in the US as
Oh,
well.
is
Yeah.
there? That's really interesting. So I've never talked about it until I did that on the podcast, and it just came out like the one with Richa Murjani for Masala Podcast. And I was saying, oh, South Asians are really racist. And Richa said, yeah, they are. And we had this conversation. And today I spoke about the fact that in the last kind of, when I moved to the UK, now I've been here, 18, 19 years. I worked in advertising, whatever. When I started to do Soul Sutras and Masala podcast about 6 years ago, I consciously went to a lot of South Asian spaces because I'm like, okay, these are my people. I need to connect with them and this,
Yeah.
that. But I wasn't really accepted, right? There was this very subtle uh, racism of like, you're not one of us. And I didn't understand it. And I'm like, am I not speaking British enough? Are my clothes not right? I couldn't really understand what it was.
Is
And then
it
I stopped
is
going
it
to
to do
these
with the
things.
classism, like casteism?
Yeah,
Caste.
it was. And I'll tell you what I figured later. I only understood it later. I'm like, clearly they don't want me here. So I stopped going to these things, right? And I'm like, okay, I'll do
Mm.
my own thing. And I've pretty much done my own thing. And all of Masala podcast has evolved as beautifully as it has
They're like,
without
oh,
access to those
oh,
groups,
we should have. Maybe we should have been so
Maybe
hasty
you
in
should have
our
been friends with her. Yeah.
choices.
But I found out why a couple of years ago. I was saying this exact thing to another British South Asian woman I'd met. And I'm like, it was really strange that I went to these South Asian, mostly female groups, and I didn't really feel very welcome. So she said, have you heard the word freshie? I'm like, what is a freshie? Freshie is a term used to describe somebody who's fresh off the boat, i.e., an Indian immigrant like me. So I'm a freshie in their eyes because I've just arrived. And my accent is slightly Indian, British, whatever, Mumbai meets Kerala meets London, whatever the accent is. So there's that hierarchy, casteism, racism, whatever you want to call it, where the new arrivals are lower than us.
Oh
We've been here
gosh.
longer
Yeah.
and we're more British than you are. So
Oh,
therefore, you're lower down the food chain than we are.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, like, it's just really messed up. And I'm
But
like,
that
God,
again is
that's,
this internalized
yes,
colonialism because it's like it's better.
exactly.
And
To be Western.
I had to be that person because I when I moved to England as a small, as a 10-year-old,
Yeah.
like, oh, I have to like
Yeah.
remove as much of my Indianness as
Yes.
possible
Yes.
and be as British as I
Absolutely.
can. And
Yes.
like my parents would come to pick me up, they speak English, whatever, but they speak
Yeah.
with an Indian accent.
Yeah.
And they'd come and, I went to private school and boarding school, so everyone was very posh, and I'd just be so cringing at like my parents. They're just so
Mm.
Indian and they're just not British and enough,
Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of. So I
Yeah.
feel like, but obviously at some point I've had to like
Yeah,
basically
do the work. Yeah.
my body sick because
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, that's so true. That kind of, yeah, I'd never heard the term freshie, but obviously I've heard fresh off the boat. And just that internalized, like, okay, well, how do we create our own
Yes.
artificial systems of I am
Yes.
better than you?
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely. And exactly, colonialism is where it comes from, because
yeah.
what is the idea? The idea is West is superior to East.
Mhm. Yeah.
Western systems are superior to Eastern systems. Western medicine is superior to Eastern medicine. Everything West is better. So even as brown people, we've internalized that belief subconsciously, where you live in a country which is primarily Western and white. It's almost like hating yourself.
Yeah.
There's like a level of
Yeah.
self-hate, um, which is what this is. Like, okay, my food is smelly,
Mhm.
my
Oh my
parents'
God, that's how I
accents or
used to
whatever.
be.
Like that's the whole
Yeah.
thing. Like it's a whole thing. And I was told this when I first moved here. Uh, I was staying with some people, and they're like, "Do you take curry to the office?" And I'm like, "What does that even mean?" I didn't even understand. To me, like that's my just my food. Like I don't even think of it as
Yeah.
curry.
Yeah.
Like
It's
it's
food.
food
It's
that I
Indian
eat.
food. Yeah.
It's Indian food. But they see it as a thing. In similar ways to you, like when I first moved, I got rid of all my bright clothes. Like I went like, right, I'm British now. I'm going to be beige and gray and black.
Beige.
And I had all these like, and I'm going to go to my little advertising job and I'm going to fit in and I'm going to try and speak like these people and dress like these people. And it's only in the last 6 years that I've done the work on myself that I wear, so much more Indian clothing. And even if it's a jumper, I will wear bright jumpers. And
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
embrace my own culture a lot more. Like in that post I write about, like really doing a trip to Kerala last year to really discover my own roots. Because I was a bit like that as well. I was like, oh, this is not where I'm from. And it's a bit whatever. And it's only when I went back and I looked at it and I'm like, oh my God, this is such a beautiful culture that I come from.
Yeah.
Ayurveda comes from Kerala. There's music. There's such a rich, um, Kochi has like a Dutch influence, a Jewish influence, a Christian influence, a Muslim influence. It's such a beautiful,
Mhm.
rich, layered culture.
Mhm.
And now I think in the last couple of years, so coincidentally, since I started to do the work with the Masala Podcast and Soul Sutras, I eat a lot more Indian food than I
Yeah.
ever did. I cook, like most of the time I cook Indian food. I go and buy Kerala rice so that I
Mhm.
can cook Kerala rice. Use a lot more kind of Kerala recipes. I speak a lot more Malayalam, which is the language of Kerala. I didn't really speak it that much,
Mhm.
but now I consciously will speak it if somebody
Yeah.
speaks the language. I think it's for me as well, it's been a reclaiming of my
Yeah.
roots and a learning to have pride and joy in my own roots, because that is who I am.
And that's
And
the
for all of
healing.
us, that's the
Yeah.
healing. That's
Yeah.
exactly the healing. In all of us, whatever our roots are, when we disconnect from it, there's pain
Yeah. It
and
is
there's
pain.
pathology,
And it's the felt sense, sensational, actual
Yes,
physiological pain.
yes, exactly. So anybody that's saying freshy and being derogatory to somebody who's just arrived is rejecting themselves in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. I mean,
And
it's complete
yeah,
internalized
exactly,
pathologizing of the self and one's roots.
exactly,
And for
exactly.
me, that healing of like reconnecting with reclaiming my roots is weirdly, as life plays out, has happened here in the
Yeah,
Mojave
yeah,
Desert, where it's
yeah,
like, oh, just so much healing, so much, where
yeah.
like where I used to before, like not, I don't want to talk about ancestors and this and that in Indian culture, and it's and now, and I never, like in England, I would never cook Indian food at home. I mean, one reason because there's so much nice Indian food. You can
Yeah,
nice Indian food
yeah,
everywhere.
yeah,
But
yeah,
when we moved here, my husband, who's English, and we moved here, and there's this one Indian restaurant here in Joshua Tree, which is not
I'm sure it's
not
awful.
for our Indian palate, and also not for
Yes.
his English palate. He
Yeah,
used to really
yeah,
like so I started cooking like Indian
yeah,
food and getting recipes from my mom
yeah.
that were like my grandmother's recipes, and getting really, like just like start doing all the kind of, it was just like, oh, I need to, this is where I feel safe now
Mm, mm.
to do this, and
Yeah,
my body started healing.
that's so
And
beautiful.
my husband was like, yes, go and do this thing. This is what you've
Yeah.
been,
Yeah.
and I was, really supported in the community with friends here. And, it's like kitchery, which is this dish,
Yes.
if
Yes. I
it,
love
from
khichdi.
all of it,
Yeah.
which has been anglicized into kedgeree, which is a different thing, but
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's like I cook kitchery all the time, and
Yeah.
there's like a joke with some of my friends. It's like we meet up for dinner and we all eat kitchery together here in the desert, and it's just, but it's
Yeah.
that, yeah, it's that reclaiming
Yeah.
of the self, and like to what you were speaking about with like the way that you were greeted when you moved, to the UK from the kind of South Asian diasporic community there. It's like that, oh, you're the freshie thing. And I guess the kind of equivalent of that in India that still exists, obviously there's the caste system,
Yeah.
but also this kind of on a much more kind of physical, visceral level, the fair skin versus dark
Yes.
skin.
Yes.
That's still very much a thing.
A
Because I remember
100%.
feeling that as a child, because
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
was like, my sister was born, she's fairer than me. And it was like, I was the kind of darker one. And it was like, there was
Yeah.
definitely, no one said it, but it was like, oh,
Yeah.
you're the darker one.
Yeah. 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 And it absolutely still existed when I lived there. Like I was told that I was really dark. Oh, your mother's so fair. What happened to you? And Indians will just say to your face, like no one's being
Yeah.
polite.
Yeah.
Uh, so fairness creams are the like largest selling product in India
Yeah.
even now.
Still, yeah.
The word in Hindi for beautiful is gori, which translates as white. Like a lot of
Yeah.
Bollywood songs are about your fair, fair
Um,
wrists and your fair, fair skin, and like. So it's very much part of the culture. So
yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of, I guess, systemic issues there as well. Colorism being one of them, casteism being one of them, the oppression of women being another. So it's, I guess these are the systems that exist in different parts of the world in different names,
Yeah.
but they're pretty much the same thing, which is shutting you down, keeping you quiet so that they can control you, I think.
Yeah. 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 It completely is. And it's like, so, it begs the question, like, what's on the other side of that? Like, to the work that you're doing, and that I'm doing, there's so many people are doing, speaking to these things in different ways, and kind of, yeah, like smashing through taboos if you want, or dissolving taboos, or composting them, or whatever, however you want to, but really evolving past these. So it's like, what's on the other side, and what is it that is under threat on the other side? Like, what is it that these systems are like holding it, and it's not being done consciously. I think these are like
No.
subconscious
Yeah.
um ways that we've,
Yeah.
the patriarchal models have learned to operate. But
Yeah.
what's on the other
Yeah.
side? It's like, yeah.
So I think I haven't got an answer, and I don't think any of us do,
No. Yeah.
if we're honest. I think all we can do is challenge the systems that we instinctively know oppress us, keep us small, keep us quiet. And the hope is that by challenging them enough, there might be a little shift and a little more and a little more and a little more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because what is the alternative? If we didn't,
Mm-hmm.
these would just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and there'd be nothing left.
Mm-hmm.
And what are we as humans if we're not here to love, to grow, to kind of cherish each other and ourselves? Like that's the point, I think, of being human.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not allowed to do those things, like why be here?
Yeah.
So to me, I don't think I consciously think, I'm just trying to be as honest as I can be. I don't even think about what is on the other side. I just know what is one step ahead. Like that's all I know at any
Mm-hmm.
given point. And that's how all of this works evolve. Like I've had no grand plan. There's never been any oh, here's a business plan of what I want to do.
Yeah,
Nothing.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
kind of just sat down.
Fluid,
I knew
yeah.
what the next step was, and instinctively, intuitively, I
Mm-hmm.
have taken the next step.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, if I can change the life of one woman, 100 women, 1,000 women, like that's it. And then they will go and change their daughters, their sisters, their girlfriends. And that's the kind of cumulative change that I think happens when people like me and you do the work that we do. We're trying to create change in society. So yeah, I know that's not a straightforward answer,
No, no, I
but
don't think there is a
that's
straightforward
kind
answer.
of,
It's really this
yeah,
sense like response that can really come through. And yeah,
yeah,
that's I resonate with everything you said, because it is just that those steps and
yeah,
reflecting back to people, like what it's
yeah,
like, oh, and the
yeah,
response that you're getting,
yeah,
like
yeah,
it's a like, yes, you're going, it's
yeah,
it's the kind of confirmation from the universe that you're going the
yeah,
right way, you're
yeah,
going the right way.
exactly, exactly, exactly. And that's everything really, because
Yeah,
that's all we can think about.
yeah. And especially when it's like it's really something that's bigger that's coming through you.
Yeah,
Isn't
exactly.
it's like nobody actually really wants to like choose to do this work, because it's
Yeah,
not that easy. It's
exactly.
not that easy to put into a little
Yeah,
box.
no,
And
no.
so I have, I mean, I know we've been going for a little bit, and I just have what, I mean, we could go on for a lot longer, I feel, but always with my guests who I love talking to. Uh but one, so I'm just curious about your thoughts and perspectives on, as you know, being South Asian women from India, with our very rich culture and spiritual traditions and all of the things that are so popular in the West now. Things like yoga, which there's a misunderstanding of yoga. Those are
Yeah,
two different things. um, and all Ayurveda now so popular, and all of these things, and the worshipping of Hindu deities. Um, what are your thoughts on appropriation
yeah,
versus like appreciation?
yeah. I think that to me they're two very different things. Um, and I think if we put a lens of, do I like, if as say you're a white yoga teacher and wants to chant mantras, do it, but understand what it is you're doing. If you're saying
Mm-hmm.
namaste, understand what that means. Don't just use it
Mm-hmm.
and put a logo on it and sell it for a lot of money. If
Mm-hmm.
you're wearing a bindi, like understand what that bindi is.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I really don't have an issue with people celebrating my culture. By all means, it's a beautiful culture. Come enjoy it. Join me as I celebrate it. But don't take it, not recognize where that's from in any shape or form, and then monetize it. Like that bothers me.
Yeah,
That really, really bothers me.
yeah, me too. Yeah.
Um, so to me, they're two very different things. Appreciation is where you're like turning up to say, oh yeah, actually, I really like this thing. And I'm going to put this into my life, into my work. But I'm at all points going to say, this is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The thing, it comes from this place. This is what it means. And thank you would be
Mm-hmm.
nice.
Yeah.
And then by all means, enjoy it. But don't kind of ignore where it came from.
Yeah.
Appropriate it. And I think that's the word appropriation, where it comes from, where, oh, this is now my thing, and I'm going to do this thing without mentioning what the origins are, what the history is, or the meaning of it is,
Mm-hmm.
and never kind of acknowledging what it is and then make it my own and then monetize it.
Yeah.
That's not cool. That's
Yeah.
appropriation. And that
Yeah.
really bothers me.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And it's such a, it's, it's, again, it's such a, I feel it on so many different levels.
Yeah, me
Like,
too.
and I don't want to
Me
constantly
too.
be like, and it's not just our
No.
culture that's
Yeah.
appropriated. So
Yeah.
many, but just, yeah, I just, yeah, I feel like it's really important to be spoken
Yeah.
to people who are listening, who really enjoy
Yeah. Yeah.
aspects of Indian
Yeah.
culture, South Asian
Yeah.
culture, and just knowing, trying to understand the larger systems
Yes.
that it
Yes.
comes from, that it's not
Yes.
just like the Western mindset has just this very, way of compartmentalizing
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
isolating certain
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Doing yoga is a misnomer, which I won't go into today, but
Yeah.
it's like isolated from the larger
Yeah.
system of
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
just understanding that it's really belongs to something much
Yeah.
bigger,
Yeah.
kind of almost approaching it with humility, with that's
Yeah.
where the
Yeah.
appreciation part comes
Yeah.
from.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess if we were to like give 3 words to people to say, okay, if you are, whether it's South Asian culture, like understand, like where does it come from? What is it that you're doing or saying or wearing? Appreciate where it comes from because there's a culture that's given that to you. And have some sort of gratitude or whatever, a thankfulness towards it. That's it. It's as simple as that. And if you're doing that, no one's going to get offended.
Yeah.
Right? I think people get offended where you're like, you're just taking my thing, and then you're not
Yeah.
even saying that that's my thing, and then you're doing this
Yeah.
whole other thing with it. That's offensive. So it's
Yeah.
it's very clear, I think,
Yeah.
the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can really feel it. It's like, I'm just going to take this and use this rather than I'm going to experience
Yeah,
this, use it and
yeah,
feel,
yeah.
yeah. So you can hear my dog barking. Sorry.
That's good.
Hear my
It's
dog
fine.
barking. Um, and so just to close, I wanted to just talk about your network, the Soul Sutras, South Asian Feminist Network, and just, I just invite you to talk a little bit about that and your vision for that. And yeah.
Yeah. So I see Soul Sutras as my soul's journey and the journey of all of us South Asian women. And so Masala Podcast is the most kind of visible, successful part of it. But it's bigger than that. For me, it's a space where we can express some of these things that we haven't got space to outside, whether it's challenging some of the taboos, whether it's um, acknowledging some of the things that we go through, experiences, talking to each other, sharing. It's a sisterhood, I think,
Mm-hmm.
of like-minded South Asian women who come together, share, nourish each other, and then kind of go on and live the life that they want to live and enjoy the culture and enjoy the beautiful bits of the culture. So that's kind of um, what it's meant to be. And in practical ways, it's a lot of events. I do kind of like festivals where I invite people to kind of come together. There's food, there's henna,
Nice.
there's things like that. Um, I'm the theatre project was a part of it, where I invite South Asian women to write their stories. I did 2 theatre shows on the basis of those stories. And yeah, it is ever evolving. So it changes. So it was that a couple of years ago. Now it's events and festivals. Tomorrow it might be something else. I write a lot as well around it. Like I write for The Guardian, I write for Cosmopolitan, I write for a lot of publications. To me, all of it is like a bigger kind of a soul purpose, hence Soul Sutras. My soul purpose and the soul purpose of a lot of South Asian women and sisters. That's what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Beautiful. Ah, wow. Thank you, Sangeeta. I feel like we've explored so much. And I mean, I still have more things to ask you, but I know we've gone way over time. But yeah, is there anything else you want to say? Any final things that are popping up that you're like, oh, I really just want to speak to that?
Nothing. I mean, in terms of like anybody watching or listening, please support the work because that's how the work gets seen and heard. You don't have to be South Asian to enjoy it. Like I talk about, the podcast talks about everything from sex, sexuality, Kamasutra, Tantra, periods, mental health, all sorts of things. So enjoy it, share it with your friends. In fact, I've had a lot of white female listeners come to say, "Oh my God, like I really enjoyed it because this thing happened to me." In your
Yeah.
culture, it's slightly more specific, but like it's broad feminist issues that I talk about. So
Yeah.
listen, share with your friends, talk about it, get in touch with me if you want to get in touch with me. I'm soulsutras.co.uk. That's my website. I'm on Instagram, Soul Sutras, even on TikTok, which I'm trying to figure out. Uh,
Raven
it's a
and
lot
I.
of dancing, which I'm not sure about.
Yeah, I know that's the general thing.
So yeah, so come say hello, and who knows, I might be coming your way as well in a
Yes,
mysterious, slightly mysterious fashion.
yes.
We will
We need
see.
to start
I'm going to
hatching
be in
plans.
America a lot more than I
Yeah,
have been. The last season of the podcast was American. Interviewed a lot of American South Asian women, talked about themes that were. So
yeah,
I will be doing more and more in the States. So yeah, come say hello.
yeah. We have hopefully hatching some plans to meet here in the desert
Yes,
in the near
that would
future.
be wonderful. That would be absolutely wonderful. I have these visions of being in
Yeah,
the desert.
yes,
Like I just saw a picture. It was so bizarre. I decided to come to Joshua Tree because I just Googled it and I saw, and that something about the picture made me go like, wow, what is
yeah.
that?
It is. I mean,
And
okay, that means you're supposed to come here. So
yeah, I think so.
it's true though. When you come here, it's pretty epic, and I feel like it just does its thing, the desert, and you probably like your work will deepen into a whole different dimension that you were like, oh, this is happening now, is it?
Wow, that sounds beautiful. Yeah,
So
sounds gorgeous.
yeah. Well, thank you so much. I've really, yeah, just enjoyed all the things that we've explored, and yeah, and see you in the desert.
Thank you so, so much for the space and the conversation and yeah, for your presence, for listening and really listening. It's been a real joy to be chatting to you. And I hope to be in the desert and I hope to kind of meet you in person. And yeah, I think yeah, things are gonna come of this, I think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And yeah, and I will have all of Sangeeta's links and bio and information in the information box below the screen on YouTube. I don't know what the technical name for that is yet. Um, and
The screen below the picture. The thing below.
yeah, I should really look this up. What
Oh,
it's
don't
called
worry.
before. Yeah.
Life's too short.
You can definitely, I really, really recommend tuning into her podcast. It's, as Sangeeta mentioned, it's not just for South Asian women. It's really just a really delightful and powerful listen. So thank you everyone for tuning in and see you next time. Bye.